Good afternoon, friends. Welcome to this Quinn family lecture. My name is Father Augustine Reisenauer. I have the distinguished pleasure of being the director of the Center for Catholic and Dominican Studies, and also the distinguished pleasure of introducing our speaker this afternoon. Sister Donna Markham is the immediate past president and CEO of Catholic Charities USA. And prior to serving in this capacity, she chaired Catholic Charity USA's board of directors and was a member of the board for 8 years. In addition, she has served in leadership positions in behavioral health care, both in Canada and the United States, and is an internationally recognized author and speaker in the areas pertaining to transformational leadership, organizational change management, and the effective treatment of the mentally ill. Sister Donna served for 6 years as the prioress of the Adrian Dominican congregation, and prior to that for 6 years as a member of the general council of her congregation. Sister Donna received her doctorate in clinical psychology from the University of Detroit and has been involved in executive leadership development, organizational transformation, and clinical practice throughout her professional career. She served as president of the Behavioral Health Institute at Mercy Health System, where she led the transformation of the delivery of behavioral health services across 7 geographical regions of the health system. She has been named a fellow of the American Board of Professional Psychology and of the Academy of Clinical Psychology. Sister Donna has dedicated the majority of her life as an Adrian Dominican sister and a licensed and board-certified clinical psychologist to the ministry of personal and global healing, helping to foster both personal and organizational change. A writer, speaker, and faith-driven leader, she is actively engaged in global peace initiatives and processes of reconciliation that have taken her across the world. She is the recipient of 10 honorary doctorates and has been named each year for the past 8 years by one of the top 50 nonprofit leaders in the US by the Nonprofit Times. Most recently, Sister Donna was honored by the US Department of Health and Human Services as one of 15 women faith leaders who have exhibited extraordinary leadership on behalf of humanity. And in August of this year, she received the Outstanding Leadership Award from the Leadership Conference of Women Religious. So please join me in welcoming Sister Donna, whose talk this afternoon is entitled Seek Truth, Make Peace, Reverence Life, and Preach with All Your Being. Sister Donna.
Thank you very much, Father. What a joy to be here. I've never been to Providence College in 50 years of being a Dominican, so I finally get to come. So I am thrilled to be with you and just share some insights gleaned from half a century of being Dominican. So, so whether we're ordained or we're professed, or whether we're students at a Dominican institution, or whether we're professors or whatever staff here, we all somehow get bitten by the Dominican charism. Now, I'm not sure how that all happens, but it does. And you might not even figure it out till years from now. But, and that sets us on a wonderful path of lifelong conversion and a deeper immersion in the gospel. So, the gospel that Dominic carried with him was the Gospel of Matthew. And that gospel is such an incredible guide to making the connection between our contemporary reality and the gospel imperative to attend to the needs of God's suffering people of whatever generation. Now, obviously, from when you listen to that bio, I've been with a lot of people who've been suffering one way or another. Little did I know back in 2015 when the board asked me to take on the presidency of Catholic Charities USA that God had a little a little something in mind for me, which was to set me on a 8-year journey into the Gospel of Matthew, especially Matthew 25. Now, given my history and where I grew up and how I lived, I don't think I ever realized how deficient I was in really understanding that gospel till this past 8 years. You know, you can recall that's the part of the Last Judgment scene when the goats are separated from and the sheep are separated, and when the ones who are awaiting judgment are faced with that striking measure of whether or not they're going to get invited into eternal life. And so what was that yardstick? When I was hungry, you gave me food. When I was thirsty, you gave me something to drink. You know it well. I was a stranger, you made me welcome. I was naked, you clothed me. I was sick, you visited me. I was imprisoned, and you came to see me, etc. You know, so 8 years, I think, opened my eyes in a way that was really stunning to me personally as I reflect on it. So, you know, when God leads us somewhere, there's always a purpose that we probably don't understand at the time. And there's always something that we're meant to learn, or something we need to face in ourselves, or something that in ourselves that needs some smoothing out. So I guess God decided it was important to put me face to face with people who are really suffering and really poor. And just as I don't think it was by accident that I landed at Catholic Charities, I do think it probably wasn't by accident that you landed here at Providence College, a really strong Dominican institution. So I wonder, you know, I would ask you, and you can think about it the rest of your lives, you know, what does God have in mind? How come you're here? You know, what is this all about? What am I meant to learn? What am I meant to experience here, regardless of what part I play in this community? So I think when we say yes to our faith, we're necessarily saying a yes to a God who's calling us closer. And we're saying yes to love better, to care more deeply, and to suffer alongside those who desperately need somebody to listen to their stories, listen to their pain, accompany them in their fear. That can happen anywhere. I think the path of encounter with people who are really suffering, and it might be your person down the hall in your dorm, it could be anywhere. That path of encounter is always transformative if we allow ourselves to listen and to accompany. It's always transformative. It opens our souls to glimpsing, I believe, the very face of Jesus. It opens our hearts to love people whom we might never have met in a more ordinary place. I know that I'm not the same as I was in 2015. I know that. Now, I need to tell you a little autobiographical. When I entered the Dominicans, I entered with a degree in philosophy and fine art from the University of Toronto. And it never dawned on me that Adrian Dominicans were going to teach. Now, I don't know what I thought I was getting myself into. So the day came, and we got our appointment cards, and I was missioned to teach first grade. I had never had an education course in my life. I had never seen anybody that big since I left home. And fortunately, that didn't last too long because my superiors figured out pretty fast that they thought maybe this wasn't a great idea. So anyway, communal prayer, the wisdom of my Dominican sisters, the needs of the times pulled me into a life I never would have dreamed of. So ultimately, I was sent to get a doctorate in clinical psychology, and I was missioned into situations of terrible suffering. I worked inside county locked psychiatric units, I've worked in war zones, homeless shelters, migrant camps, and remote places on Earth where there's very little access to mental health care. And now, for the last 8 years, I was privileged to lead Catholic Charities as we served over 15 million poor and suffering people in our country and the territories each year. So a significant responsibility that I've had, and along with my team, is to protect those among us who are the very most vulnerable. People who are suffering from poverty, from hunger, from addictions, from severe mental illness, people fleeing for their lives as migrants and refugees, and those reeling in the aftermath of some of the horrific natural disasters that are just covering our country these days. So I've been privileged to meet with many broken and frightened sisters and brothers of ours, and I've listened to their stories, and I've shared their tears, and I know that I have been changed. So just given that, I would like to share 4 short lessons with you as my own being has been stretched by what I've encountered. A lot of what I'm saying in terms of the frame of this is not my own. It comes from my Adrian Dominican congregation that in an inspired moment came up with these ways of trying to articulate what it means to be Dominican and what is the charism all about. So I'm going to just share 8 phrases that issue, I think, from the heart of the Dominican charism. And hopefully it'll help you just think in a quick way of what it is that we do in places like Providence. Seek truth, make peace, reverence life, and preach with everything you've got in you. And I don't mean pulpit preaching. I'll get into that, what I mean by that in a minute. So it's just 8 phrases. So seek truth. Here at Providence, you're part of a long line of scholars committed to searching for truth to address the moral and social dilemmas of our times. Whatever your area of expertise, whatever field of study you're in, you embody the depth of the Dominican charism as you search to try to find what's good and true and right in bringing about a more compassionate society. Another way to say bringing about the good that we hold in common and really celebrating that in our world today. We seek truth through prayer, study, dialogue, discernment, never being timid to engage in difficult conversations on complex topics with people who may hold very different positions from ours. By way of example, this past spring, I'll give you, this is a concrete one, it's quite fresh because I've just come away from it, but I was, the migration crisis has caused an enormous amount of conflict and very mean, vitriolic speech in our country. And interestingly, as Catholics, we found ourselves often at the butt of some of the meanest comments that were issuing from members of Congress. I was targeted personally. I was doxxed. I received death threats because we were caring for the migrants at the border. The USCCB, the Conference of Catholic Bishops, was targeted as well. So I decided that probably the smartest thing I could do would be to go to Congress and meet with Catholic Republican congressmen and women, because that's where most of there were four or five folks that were really stirring up the whole pot. I didn't meet with them. I met with their colleagues. And they were all wonderful and wonderful men and women that I met with who were deeply aware of the work of Catholic Charities, who were, many of them actually volunteered at Catholic Charities in their home districts. And I asked them for help. And I said, how do you think we should deal with this? And so from each of them, I got some very, very wise and helpful advice. And to be honest, I was a little fearful of what I was going to walk into because of some of the targeting I had received. But I thought, well, the best thing to do is go in and talk with them, see what's going to happen in that dialogue. So I think it is part of my obligation as a Dominican to speak clearly about, in my case, the humanitarian work as a direct expression of the gospel, to care for the least of our sisters and brothers. I don't go in there and talk politics. I speak from the heart of the gospel. I found that staying out of the political discourse is the absolute best way to talk about the work that we do. And people understand that regardless of what their faith is, whether they're Christian, Jewish, Muslim, whatever, they understand that. And we had some very, very important conversations. I met with 14 Catholic congressmen. And, just said, I'm not a politician. We're trying to help people who are really in trouble, and can you help us because we're surely not understood. So trying to build a bridge with people to ask for their help, ask for their advice. It's all part of what it is to search for truth in it. And I'm banking on the truth of the gospel. I'm not talking about who's right in the political ping pong match that we're watching. So I believe that we're a community of faith that strives to care for people who are really in trouble and vulnerable, and that when we engage in dialogue that's grounded in the gospel and not arguing on some political from some political perspective, it's at that very point where conversation opens up and we begin to speak as human beings to one another, not in any kind of adversarial way. Now, I can attest to the fact that that's not easy work. And I also will tell you the truth that some of those offices I went into, I was scared to death. But I knew I needed to do it because I knew I had to let them know what was going on. And whether it was hard or not, I knew I had to tell them, I needed to tell them what we were doing was not against federal law. It wasn't stealing money. It wasn't trafficking children. It wasn't sticking people in trunks of cars and driving them from Mexico to the United States. No, I'm not leading an invasion, etc. So I think engaging in that kind of dialogue that's productive and respectful is really the only way for us to move forward. And there's far too little of that in our world. And that's where I think, that's where part of the being in a Dominican institution and surrounded with a lot of really smart people who hold lots of different viewpoints, and to enter into good conversation and try to understand the other. I'm going to talk about another example of that later on, but I think that is really part of the gift that we have as being part of this big Dominican family of ours. So I would challenge you to hold on, like Dominic, to that Gospel of Matthew. So if you don't know where to pray in the Bible, try there as a beginner. Matthew 25, it's a good one. Search for the truth in Jesus' words, holding near to your heart the question of how you're going to direct your life and your talent and your expertise to bettering humankind. So don't waver. One thing I would want to say is don't waver from what the right thing is to do on behalf of those who've been left out. We hear that message over and over again from Pope Francis. he told Catholic Charities in 2014, all of us, we were gathered together, about 700 of us, and he video conferenced into our annual gathering and said, go to the margins, go into the streets, stay in the streets with the people who need you most, and you're going to find God there. And that was a powerful message. So not to be timid, and always, always, always stay away from demonizing somebody who may hold a diametrically opposed view from your own. You might not like the idea, but don't demonize the person. So seek truth, make peace. I think for us it's really important, especially right now, for us to really look for ways of making reconciliation far more tangible in our world right now. It's at the core of being a peaceful society. You know as well as I do that we're living in a very deeply disturbing context of just a lot of divisiveness. A time when civil discourse, I think, I was just watching the Congress today, civil discourse has just hit an all-time low. And building relationships has just given way to setting up walls, real or imagined, and fences, real or imagined, that insulate our mindsets and solidify our positions. And I think that ultimately destroys the possibility of respectful engagement or building healthy and reconciling community. So I think the significance of engaging in educated dialogue in the service of establishing relationships bids us to assume today, I believe, a truly countercultural stance, because that's not what's happening. Everybody's just fighting. So if we can figure out a way to engage people who are very different, I think we are really, really trying to do something good for our world and our society. So I think that's what Dominican spirituality prepares us to do, if we're awake to it. I'm going to tell you a story because it happened to me as a young sister, and it was a very, very powerful lesson for me to learn. And I think it gave me the courage ultimately to walk into a lot of situations where I knew I was on opposite ends of the person or group I was speaking with. I'm going to keep anonymous where and who, because I don't want to tell stories out of school, but it is an incredible lesson. I was about, I think, 28 years old, and I had just finished my Ph.D., and I was sent to set up a clinic in a large urban area, a clinic that would serve poor people. And I knew that I would have to raise money, development director. And I knew nothing about raising money, and I thought, I can't ask anybody for money. No. The Archbishop at the time was a very, very harsh guy, and the priests didn't like him at all. They were scared of him. They really couldn't, they just wanted him to get sent to another diocese. But I knew that he knew how to raise money. So I thought, wonder what would happen if I called him up and asked him if I could come and talk to him. And if he would teach me something about how to ask for money. I mean, I must have been really bold. So I called him up, and of course I didn't get him. I got his priest secretary, but the Archbishop said, yes, I would be happy to meet with her. So I went in, and he gave me some lessons, and then he says, okay, now it's time. You're going to ask me for some money. And I'm like, oh, well, no. So he said, come on, ask me. So we went through this whole thing, and I asked him for some money. And he pulls out his checkbook, and he writes me a check for $5,000, which at that time was huge. And So then, and I thanked him, and I learned a lot from him. And so then he was going to have a meeting of all the priests in the archdiocese, and he called me, and he said, would you come and facilitate it, because the priests hate me. And I said, well, I'll facilitate it, that's fine. He says, okay, but you got to sit right next to me. And if I start saying something that they're going to get really mad about, I want you to just kick me. And I'm thinking, I'm not going to kick an archbishop. And he says, no, stop, will you do that? And I said, okay. So here's this guy. Now and I'm dressed not much differently than this. I was not in habit or anything. And we had, but I'm sitting there with him and the priests, and I didn't kick him, but I put my hand on him one time, and don't go there. So anyway, this began. I went to him for help. He came to me for help. Now, mind you, I was not in habit, and those days that was a big problem, because I wasn't wearing a habit. But he still, it was all right. So then we got into this pattern of he would call me, I would call him, and then we would have lunch, usually at his residence, and we would have these conversations about the magisterium and about contemporary religious life and what are women religious ever thinking about, and how do you understand obedience, and lots of pretty, and I'm like really young, but I'm talking with him. And then he says to me one day, he says, well, I'd like it a whole lot better if you were wearing a habit. And I said to him, Archbishop, let's not go there. Because we're really starting to have a good conversation and understanding and learning from one another. And let's not go into something where it's going to be so dead-ended and that we're not going to be able to continue a friendship. And he says, you're right. So from that point on, we continued these conversations. Most of the people in my community never knew that I did this, because they probably would have thought I had lost my mind because of his reputation. And so I met with him for probably 30 years, off and on. But what that did to me is that, one time I remember saying to him, I was being nominated to be Prioress General of the community, and I said, what do you think of that? And he said, you'd be a very good prioress. I said, you think so? And he says, yes. And he said, I'm going to pray for you. I said, okay. And so with that realization, where I came to the awareness that he is as holy, as dedicated, as solid as any member of my congregation, anybody who looks like me. This man has a different way of expressing his faith, but he is no less than I, and no more than I, that we are meeting each other and able to have this conversation. So really, for me, that 30 years was the formation for giving me the courage to get up and to take a step into the other camp, whatever that was, and to be able to stand in a position where it was not fraught with arguing or standoffs or anything. It was just good relating. So I hope that each of you someday has that opportunity with someone who's really different from you, to really befriend them. Because I think it's so absolutely powerful to realize I don't have the full truth. I certainly don't. But that reconciliation between the two of us, I talk about it now because he's deceased, and I feel okay in doing that. But I think that it is formative, and it has helped me to be a far better woman religious, a better leader, because I'm not afraid. And so I think that making peace, that was an example of my learning. And making peace I think for all of us has to be at one of the top things that we do in our lives today because of the situations we're in. I'm going to tell you another story of profound reconciliation and peacemaking that's different. And it concerns a very, very broken priest. And he was sent for treatment up where I was running a psychiatric facility. And his bishop sent him up there, and the priest had really made a mess of his life, had really, really made a mess of his life and many other people's lives. So he got sent for a lengthy treatment to try to help him unpack what led to terrible behavior. And as he was coming to the end of his treatment, his therapist told him that his healing was not going to be complete until he went to his bishop and thanked the bishop for allowing him to get treatment and apologized to the bishop for the scandal he had brought on his diocese. And the priest said to his therapist, "I can't do it. I cannot do that. I'm so ashamed. I'm scared to death. He's just going to scream at me. He's probably going to not let me have faculties. I can't do it." And so the therapist said, "Well, you know your healing is not going to be solid unless you do that." So then he left. He wouldn't do it. He went back, and he had to come back 3 months later for his aftercare checkup. And the therapist asked him, "Did you talk to your bishop?" He says, "Nope. Too scared. I can't do it." The therapist repeated, same thing. You're not gonna be better till you do it. So then 6 months after that, the guy comes back for his last check-in, and the therapist again says, "Well," and the priest says, "Oh, you're not gonna believe what happened. We went to a meeting of all the priests, and I was standing in line for lunch, and right next to me was the bishop, and there was this room right off to the side of the hallway, and I thought, I gotta do it. So he asked the bishop if he could see him for a minute in the room. So the bishop said, sure. He went in the room, and the priest told him how sorry he was that he had made such a scandal and such a mess, and that he wanted to thank him for letting him get treatment, and that, he said, I really need to tell you that. And the bishop, this bishop that he was terrified of, the bishop, instead of getting mad at him, the bishop says to him, kneels down. The bishop knelt down in front of him and asked the priest for his blessing. Surprise. So this guy's telling his therapist this. And he said, I was wrong the whole time. I had made him into this ogre, and he was going to be horrible to me. And he knelt down in front of me and asked me to bless him. And so, I share that with you because I think it takes a lot of courage sometimes to engage in difficult conversations, especially when with all kinds of emotion gets in there. So I think that story, between the story of myself getting over my fear and making friends with a person I don't think I ever would have imagined, and this incident of this very broken man finally getting up the courage to talk to his bishop and what happened, are really illustrative of what I think it really means for us to make peace. So seek truth, make peace, reverence life. You know that right now, these times are replete with the destruction of life in all ways: human life, the environment, war, all kinds of disturbances in our cities. And we've been exhorted by Pope Francis to hear and connect the cry of the earth with the cries of the poor. And I think the challenge for each of us who are inheritors of the charism of Dominic is, how are we going to use our grounding in prayer, our knowledge, our writing, our speaking, our teaching, to address these cries. How do we build in our world today and shore up a culture of life in all its forms, realizing that we're all connected to each other and we're connected to creation? So I think we're dependent on one another as we're dependent on our environment to support and sustain us. We don't have a lot of time to spare as the vulnerability of our planet and the fragility of humans strains under the burdens of what we've unnecessarily inflicted on it. You who are students here, you're going to be the inheritors and the guardians of having to make some very difficult decisions in your lives. And I just hope you will pray that you have the courage to really be bold in taking those steps in protecting life and creation. We don't have any time to spare. So we dare not be deaf to the cry of earth, the cries of the poor, the cries of vulnerable human beings, because all creation is sacred. So seek truth, make peace, reverence life, and preach with all you've got. Now, Pope Francis tells us that the face of God is mercy. And we've been charged by the Holy Father to promote a culture of care and compassion throughout our world, to work tirelessly on behalf of those who've been excluded, marginalized, to stand with those who are suffering, and to enter into an encounter that opens the way for others to know and experience the tremendous and abundant love of God. We can't do that through computer screens. Can't do it through social media. It's got to be people, talking to people. I love the computer screens and the social media, but sometimes, some things, you got to be there. We need to show up to witness. I would say, to preach by our lives, our very lives, that there's more life than death, more hope than despair in our world. That's the mystery that's the Paschal mystery, that we believe that. Preaching with our lives means that we take the parable of the Good Samaritan very seriously. It means that when we encounter someone in really difficult straits, we don't walk to the other side of the road and pretend we don't see them. It means, like the Good Samaritan, we approach them and extend compassion. It means we listen to their story, to their cries for help, and we try to help. For me, I've had to show up at the cages along the border with children locked in cages because they were separated from their moms and dads. I've had to show up in homeless shelters. I spent a night on the streets of Washington with the Catholic Charities Director of Washington, D.C., and walked through the city one night to really see what was happening. Psychiatric units. I've been in war-torn places like Iraq and Ukraine. But I believe that preaching with our lives means we got to show up. It means I can't just live a comfortable, cautious, safe life. It means I have to be willing to open my own heart to reservoirs of compassion that I never thought I had. When we preach by our lives, walking with those who are very vulnerable, trying to survive, we're changed. And we're not going to be the same again. So fear diminishes in that encounter. Somehow fear diminishes. We become emboldened to take real big risks in radical service to the mission. It doesn't mean we do that every day, but it means that we don't shy away from those opportunities when we have them. I believe that this too is at the core of our Dominican spirituality. Human anguish and the call to respond are so compelling that any concern for our own safety begins to dissipate. We get emboldened And in getting emboldened, that means that sometimes we find ourselves crying alongside those that we accompany. So I think there seems to be no way to explain what happens to us inside when we enter into those kinds of situations. I don't know how, I don't have words to explain it, but I do know that there's no longer any room left in me for postponing radical response, and the awareness of urgency just floods into me. There's so much that needs to happen. It's a place of the soul, I think, where we somehow are stripped of anything that prevents us from acting with clarity and conviction. Time is short, and the cries of earth and her suffering poor are shrill. We have to do something, wherever that is. I know you've probably had experiences that have led you to a certain emboldening in your own lives. They might not be real dramatic, but situations where you know you took a risk to help somebody or to care for somebody or reach out to somebody where you just didn't think you would have, that wouldn't be your normal MO. But something happens and you do it. For me, that was receiving recently a Ukrainian female medic who had survived being captured by the Russians and put in a gulag. She won't ever talk about what happened to her there, but I was just there with her as she told what she felt comfortable telling of her story. Or last year, being with holding a broken grandma in Uvalde, whose grandchild had been murdered in that school massacre. Or standing at the edge of a village that had been completely erased because of fires in California. Most recently, receiving 2 Afghan men who had traveled through 15 countries, including going through the Darien Gap, which some of you know what that is. It's the jungle between Panama and Colombia. Very dangerous. And somehow they landed at the National Office of Catholic Charities USA. After having had all their money stolen, 15 months of traveling, 15 countries, they landed at our doorstep during Ramadan, 2 Muslim men, and said, "Is this Catholic Charities?" And we said, "Yeah, but we're not a service center. What do you need?" And they said, "We need help. We're so embarrassed. We need help." And so then we spent the entire day trying to find a place where they could stay that night, because I said, "You're not going to leave here. You are not going to sleep on the street again. You're staying here. You might be staying in our conference room, but you're not going out on the street." So we'd called all the shelters, all the Catholic Charities places. Everybody was full. So my chief communications officer said, "Let me call my wife. Tracy, can I bring home 2 Afghan refugees who have nowhere to sleep?" And Tracy said, "Sure." So these 2 young men, one was 20, the other was 29, went home with my colleague, and when they saw a bed, they both started to cry because they hadn't seen a bed. And that's the kind of thing where he took a risk. I said, "Well, I could take him to my apartment, but I don't think 2 Muslim men and a nun is going to be real good. I don't know what they think of that, but I mean, I'm not going to let him sleep on the street." I would have done it. I mean, what the heck, really. I could be their grandma. So, but anyway, they were fleeing from the Taliban because they belonged to a certain kind of tribe that the Taliban hated, and they were going to kill them. So those kinds of experiences, wherever they happen, strip the noise away from touching into the heart of the gospel. That's what it's all about. It means we're not afraid anymore. We just do it because it's the right thing to do. So I think with each of those things that we do, we get a little bit more emboldened to take another step. So I would say, and I said this to the LCWR folks, that I'm not afraid anymore of what's going to happen to me. I'm really not. You know, it's like if I do what I'm supposed to do and I do the right thing, I'm not afraid. So I think many of you probably won't be directly engaged with the poorest of the poor, but every one of us stands in need of compassion in how we treat one another, how we treat our families, how we treat our roommates, how we treat the people in our classes, how we treat our colleagues, how we respond to homeless folks living under the bridge. This is a measure of our mercy. And it's as our very lives, I think, by our very lives, we become the preaching of the gospel. We don't have to be in the pulpit in church. It's by our very lives. And that, to me, is the gift that we bring, and we should be bringing as people touched by the Dominican charism. Your lives give witness through the kindness of your actions, just as significantly as anything you may ever say or write. You know, it's going to be how you are, how you connect. So it's easy, you know, seek truth, make peace, reverence life, and preach with everything you've got. So that's all you need to hold on to, those 4 phrases. And if you do that, I think our world will be a whole heck of a lot better. So with that, I just want to say thank you, and I'm open to taking any of your questions, okay?
So friends, we have some time now for Q&A, and there are a lot of students in this room who have brought a lot of light. So we'll reserve the first question for Sister Donna to one of our brilliant students. Please raise your hand, and John and I will bring mics.
It can be a comment, too. It doesn't need to be a question. It can just be a comment. Does it sound nuts to you? This is for the mic, for the video thing. It's not because I can't hear you.
That's fine. I just think it's really inspiring how much you've like done and helped so many other people that are like less fortunate than like all of us like sitting in this room right now. I think that's really inspiring.
But guess what you can do too. So
Yeah.
just think about that. You know, anybody can do it. Thanks. Hi.
Thank you for such an inspiring message. My name is Comforter Tay, and I'm in the secondary education program. During our last graduation ceremony, we had Monsignor Bobby Benson from Ghana, who is actually working with people that have been hit with AIDS.
AIDS. Okay.
And he has this message of Matthew 25. And he calls his place Matthew 25. And for me to
Wonderful.
come here and listen to you talk about this, we have taken students from Providence to Ghana. And the 10 days that they have spent in Ghana, going to Matthew 25 house and actually observing and seeing people who have lived their lives with HIV, AIDS, and who have been marginalized and who are not being accepted by their families, tell their stories, have been one of the most impacting thing on our students here. Many of them have cried, many of them have hugged those people. And so to come here today and hear you talk about going out there and actually meeting and talking is what is going to be impactful.
Absolutely.
So a question or probably a comment that I want to make here that probably you have an answer to, and that's something that I'm struggling as an educator, is that you are talking here to probably the choir. If you talk to the whole of Providence College community, You are going to be talking to students who have not had the opportunity to be exposed to the marginalized, who do not even understand what it means to be hit by poverty or to be felt as someone who does not belong. And you have grown and had that opportunity. You have studied and you were placed in that position to actually feel it. So what do we need to do here when we have students who don't have that opportunity to actually experience what you are saying? Because as you say, and it's true, social media doesn't do it. Talking or preaching to the students does not do it.
No.
It's actually going there and feel it. So how do we get our students to feel it?
Well, let me tell you something. When I was in university, I don't think I had ever met a poor person in my life, okay? I had not met a migrant. I had not met a poor person. I lived a very sheltered life. But what happened to me in university, what happened to me was that something sunk into me that said, that's, something more, I need something more. So it didn't happen as a university student. Because when I think about this, my siblings would just cringe when I tell them some of where I've been, but I didn't grow up knowing anything about the suffering of people. But the university education, wonderful theology professors, wonderful men and women religious, and a lot of really good-hearted folks that I met in the university setting opened me up to look at. I was going to either enter the Peace Corps or become a Dominican, because something happened in me there. And so I would say what you would hope for in a setting like this is that, it's not that, it might not be that, if you have the opportunity to have one of those experiences in mission as part of your education, fantastic. And it might not happen while you're in college. It might happen a little later, but sometime take advantage of it if you can. Because it is, what you're saying, it's the encounter with people who are really in need that changes us. But the attitude of mind happens anywhere. So I think that's a blessing too. So don't be too hard on yourselves, or because it doesn't happen necessarily when you're 19, 20 years old. It might happen later because something happened here that opens you up.
Hi, my name is Pam. Thank you so much for your words. I'd be remiss to not say in front of the students, we have a lot of trips here to do that, both domestic and international. So
Great.
Keep your eyes out for those
Yeah.
opportunities. My question for you is a career in which you've seen injustice and trauma and hurt, and I've even received hatred for the work you're doing. How do you stay the course? How do you continue to face those things? How do you continue to do this work and preach with all your being?
I would have to be really honest with you and say that for me, and I have to get up really early in the morning, and I need to spend time in prayer because I can't do it without that. So for me, my time in prayer with Scripture, with the Psalms, however that is really when I begin to ground myself and can begin to, just to put all of this in front of God and say, help me to know how I can help others. Because without that reflective time, I don't think we have the stamina to be able to do it day in, day out. So I think it has a lot to do with that. However, it might be, for you, it might be that kind of experience. For others, it might be just taking a beautiful walk in nature and allowing yourself to feel the compassion of God in nature. Whatever it is, that time out has to be there because we'd just be blithering idiots, I think, if we didn't have some time out. So thanks for asking that. I appreciate that.
Hi, sister. I'm Terry McGoldrick in the theology department.
Great.
Liberation theology, the poor are closer to God. You've worked with the mentally ill, the migrant, the refugee. What have you learned about God from the poor?
I think what I learn about God is God's enormous love. God's enormous love. And that I am so privileged to be able to walk with these people as some kind of an instrument to be present to them. But it's about the love of God, I think, that has really hit me hardest. People that I would have thought in my younger days I would have been terrified of. I'm not terrified of them. They're beautiful. They're frightened, they're broken, whatever. They're beautiful people. That's how I'd answer that.
I was really inspired by your talk, and I am, as president here, really so pleased that so many of our students are involved with work with the poor. And Matthew 25 was one of the things that motivated us to start a school of nursing. And I hope there are some of the nursing students here today to have heard your talk, because this is going to be their lives. And we constantly emphasize to them that they're not technicians, they're healers. And they're going to be the face of God for people that they minister to. And again, I want to thank you, because it was just so inspiring to hear what your experiences have been. And I bet it's never what you thought you'd be doing in religious life.
Nothing. Thank God I wasn't left in first grade.
Right. Yeah.
Although they're darling, but it was not my gift.
But thank you.
So friends, we have time for one more question or comment.
Hi, my name is Rob. I'm in the philosophy department here at Providence. I'm new to the place, and I loved the inspiring stories that you told so compellingly. But part of what makes those stories inspiring is that they were stories of relative success that you had with the Archbishop or with the Republican congressman, and I think it's appropriate that you tell the success stories. But I'd like to hear you reflect a little more about the dozens of other times where you've summoned up courage to take on some difficult feat of reconciliation or something, and it didn't go so well. Mm-hmm. Maybe you were rebuffed or turned away and not treated in the way that you ultimately were in the stories that you mentioned. Where do you get the perseverance and the strength to handle that and not be discouraged?
Yeah, that's a very good question. I think I can tell you one which that will illustrate that. Where, remember, some of you may not, but many of you will, when there was this whole effort to investigate religious life, of women's religious life in the United States, and it was happening concurrently with the sex abuse crisis, and I was at a meeting of bishops, and this whole investigation was going on, and I asked to speak with one of the bishops, and it was during our coffee break, and I asked if I could talk to him a little bit about what was happening with the investigation and how he thought we should handle it, etc. He physically pushed me and said, "I don't want to talk to you." That's true. So, I thought about it. Well, of course, I still think of it. I remember it, right? But I had to really come to terms with, all right, how am I going to respond to him the next time I see him? Because my intuition would say, just stay away. I don't want to get pushed. But I decided that I would, greet him and be polite. I did not attempt to engage him again, but I did greet him. I wasn't going to just walk away. So those are the kinds of things where you always have to, that things happen like that. And he might have just been having a horrible day. So I don't know. I don't know him well enough to know what that was all about, mercifully. But I think there are those kinds of situations where you have to make, I don't want to hold a grudge and say, oh my gosh, that he's a really evil person. No, he might have been having a terrible day. He could have had something happen in his diocese. I mean, I don't know what happened, because I didn't do anything to offend him, but except ask to talk to him. So I think, just to be able to not to be intimidated by at least approaching him again. So, but there are times like that.
Friends, we can continue the conversation in a reception that we have in the adjacent Center for Catholic and Dominican Studies that you can just feel free to be invited through those doors. And the last remaining duty that we have together is to thank Sister Donna for a brilliant and very wise lecture this afternoon. Thank you, Sister Donna.
My honor.